Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. During our weekly episodes, we explore this intersection between spirituality and psychology. And I'm so happy to say we end up at the end of each episode capturing some wisdom that is found in either field, right? But for those of you who do not know me, I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and I'm so excited to have with me Peter Hayes to go about this episode. So, Peter, today we're proposing to dive deep into some really, really powerful concepts in psychology and spirituality, right? But we want to go over the idea of integrating or the integration of the self. So, as we know, everyone, Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss uh, the founder of psychoanalysis, right? The analytical psychology, forgive me. But Carl Jung, he is just one of the greatest minds in psychology, and he explored the idea of persona, right? And the shadow. And we usually, including him, would see those two concepts as polar opposite areas of the human psyche. So let's just talk about Peter about those concepts before we talk. And I just wanted to let everyone know that Peter, who's here with me today, he's going to help us look at how these ideas brought to us by Carl Jung, they are really reflected in some interesting spiritual teachings, and they all, including Joanna D'Angelo's, obviously, but they're all about self-discovery, about forgiveness, about transformation. But Peter, before we really start, I just want to ask, why does it matter for us today to talk about it? Why is it important to even understand or reconcile those opposing forces within ourselves? How could we perhaps begin to integrate them in a way that can lead to psychological health, emotional balance, even spiritual wholeness or plenitude, favorite word by Joanna D'Angelis. So, with that, I just wanted to, to
Mhm.
come to a brief moment of definitions. So there's grounding to us to continue today, because Joanna DeAngelis, in one of her books, she states that Jung specifically considered the persona and the shadow as classic opposites, right? And she says that they're expressed in the ego as polarities within a total vision of the psyche. And I'm like, whoa, Joanna, it's a lot of content in just one statement. So maybe we can start defining them, break them down, right? And it will be for me and the audience. So first, I would like to bring to you, Peter, um, the understanding of what Jung means by total vision of the psyche, right? So Jung, his vision of the psyche refers to this his view, right, that the human mind is a complex, multifaceted structure composed of different layers, right? So it's one human mind, but there are layers in it. There are many different facets. And Peter, in his vision, the ego would represent the conscious part of the psyche, the, I could say, the I, or myself, my self-awareness, right? But beneath the ego would Jung talks about how the unconscious lies just beneath. And when he talks about the unconscious, he means the personal unconscious as well as the collective unconscious. Just for everybody to remember, Freud and in his partnership with Jung, they talked a lot about the personal unconscious, right? But Jung really brought to us the concept of collective unconscious. But despite all of it, the personal unconscious would contain, oh, our forgotten memories, right? The repressed experience, and the collective unconscious would hold, and this is fascinating topic. We're not going to talk today, but it's fascinating to me, the ideas of universal archetypes, and those archetypes shape our experience, yeah, humanity, right? All of human experience across time and across culture. So an example is the mother archetype, the father archetype, so on and so forth. And it's interesting that within this vision, then we have to think about the persona again and the shadow as the two fundamental elements that make up different dimensions of our psyche. Each one are representing those opposing forces that eventually will be integrated into this plenitude, this psychological wholeness. So, Peter, coming back to you for help, can you come here and perhaps define what does Jung mean by persona, and how does it truly relate with the self? With the, I'm sorry, not with the self, with the ego.
Well, thank you for having me back here. It's a pleasure. Um, Persona, is, according to Carl Jung, and it's a concept that Carl Jung coined, is it's essentially the way we come across in public. It is the society, it's the mask that we may wear or the image that we project of ourselves
I always
to,
put my hand in front of me, Peter,
yeah,
when I say persona. It's this mask, right?
it's
But go
this
ahead.
mask. Yeah,
And everyone, Peter
yeah.
has a background in theater, so he's perfect to talk about persona, right, Peter?
Well, the persona is a way that we present ourselves
Mhm,
to other, our fellow human beings, the way we present ourselves in society.
mhm,
And the reason we develop a persona is it's influenced by our families, it's influenced by the culture we're in, by the social values that we grew up and so forth. And the persona is a way in which we learn how to be acceptable to others. Um, Presumably, most of us are concerned about that. It's a kind of adaptive process that we go through in order to um, not only be accepted by others, but I think you could say it's a way that we protect ourselves. So the persona that we have, it can be generally a positive kind of persona in which we come across a certain way that people seem to like.
mhm.
However, the persona might also be a way of adapting that is not so positive. Maybe we're a little too conciliatory to others and will do or act in almost any way to please others. And one of the things Jung warned about is that we may become so embedded within our persona, the mask, that we're actually losing a sense of who we are. So
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
persona is important in terms of our development, but it's not a mode of behavior that we can live with constantly, especially if we're divorcing ourselves from our deeper selves, from our truer, more authentic selves. So it's yeah.
No, no, I was going to say what comes to my mind here
Mhm.
is what we think about almost like a social filter, right? So
Yeah.
perhaps
Mhm.
the persona of, I'm talking about myself, right? A
Hmm.
woman at my age,
Hmm.
living in this country today may not be
Hmm.
the same persona that I would have adopted or adapted to uh, as the days of my great grandmother or my grandmother or even my mother, right? Those gender related activities or attitudes change with
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
and so do the personas. Or even if you think about it, Peter, the idea of what was a family, right, in the, let's say, 50s, changed dramatically in the 60s and changed again 70s, 80s, today's, right?
Right.
And it's very
Mm.
interesting because from that perspective you can see that it is intrinsically contextualized to the culture and to the times, right? The context by which we are inserted to. So for
Hmm.
me to be considered, I don't know, we had a discussion about a week or so ago, Peter, and we
Hmm.
had, it was very interesting. We had folks from different, this is at work, but different parts of the world. So we had
Hmm.
somebody from South Africa, somebody from Ireland, somebody from Canada, somebody from England, somebody from the Netherlands, and a couple of people from different parts of the United States. And the discussion was about, is it the helicopter parents, and now they're bringing about the lawnmower the lawnmower parent. I never heard of this term, but those are the
Lawnmower
parents
parents.
that
Right.
pave the way for the children instead of the children
Hmm.
learning
Hmm.
to pave the way themselves, which changes the so-called what is to be a good parent in this new set of expectations for today, right? Versus
Hmm.
when I or you, Peter, were children, right? Uh, or or early parents. I don't know, but it's very interesting how that idea of persona, that filter, that and the masks, right? The behaviors that are expected shift with time.
Right. When you were talking before about how
Mm,
you as a woman might be today versus, say, the time of your great grandmother,
yeah,
um, well, I do have a background in theater, and I was thinking about a play that I
yeah.
did some work on, if I remember at one point. It was a play reading, I think. It was
Hmm.
written by a woman, and the line in it, which was not, she was criticizing this attitude, but she said in the line, "A good woman dissembles," and you know, in other words, she was criticizing this idea that in order to be an acceptable woman, you have to always, you know, defer to everybody else, and so she was challenging that idea.
Yeah,
Whereas perhaps in a, well, I don't know about perhaps, but in a different time period, that might have been the expectation.
yeah,
So,
and it's difficult, right? But I'm not saying this is no apology to this behavior, that behavior. It's just the idea
mhm,
that the persona that we all mostly unconsciously adopt.
mhm,
Sometimes it is conscious. It is that public figure, right?
mhm,
That's how you, Peter, see me, how I see you, and it's that perhaps curated or edited facade. And this is our best effort to prove ourselves to be the best example of the person within the constraints of what is society. And we could talk a lot about
mhm,
marginalized individuals from that viewpoint. We could talk about many different things, but I think the most important thing is to know that it's not bad or good. It just is. A persona is a mechanism
mhm, mhm,
that exists within the egoic construct so that we can be prepared to the external world to be what is expected of me. So as a child, there's a set of expectations in terms of behaviors that
mhm,
are repressed or controlled, if you will, through education, through many different things. But then as you grow, we transition into a different persona, right? Maybe now I am a student at a college, and then perhaps the next persona would be I'm now a spouse of somebody else, and
mhm.
then I'm a mother, and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting how we shift and we don't even realize, but we do nevertheless, right?
Right. I think you touched on an important point about the persona's neither good nor bad. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because when we say persona, and then a common way to describe it is the mask that we have.
Yes.
Well, that
Yes.
sounds negative, right? Oh, we're being
Yeah.
phony, we're hiding, and so forth. But it may very much be this is what we need in order to cope, to
Yeah.
uh, to survive.
Yeah.
And as you said, it may be unconscious, it may be somewhat conscious, very conscious as well. Um, and so it's an important part of us developing ourselves into who we are.
Yes.
Um, at the same time, it's also, how do we actually reach our authentic selves?
Absolutely. And that's really the topic at hand, right, Peter? How
Mhm,
do I, while I'm aware that there's these, right, personas, we may have several, they are mechanisms by which I can create that sense of belonging. So it's really part of us as biosocial beings, right?
mhm,
But
mhm,
inherent in me being this, I'm putting my hand up, Peter, on one mask, right? Versus that, there's some aspects inherently in the idea of a persona that it is suppressed, right? Because it's no longer 365 degree 360 degrees, sorry, of who I am as an authentic, multifaceted being.
mhm,
I really need to suppress, let's say, the laziness of me when I am a mother, right? And I don't know, I'm just picking up things here, right? But anyways, once you craft that person quite well, there's a movement toward repressing and the idea that exists, which is the opposite. And I would like to maybe bring up here the definition, Peter, of the polar opposite, as we could say, of a persona, which is the shadow, right? So
mhm,
persona is how I show up, right?
mhm,
Am I
mhm,
always smiling? But what about my days that I'm sad? Do I repress those, for example, right? But the other side of it is the shadow, which really is representation of my unconscious, specifically my repressed, the areas that are repressed within myself, the hidden aspects of my personality that my ego, right,
mhm,
and my persona deny, reject, etc. Their persona non grata, right? And these aspects may include, for example, all those instincts or instinctive response to an event, or they represent my true desires, right? I really want to be, I don't know, I'm thinking here of an
mhm,
example. I want to be the CEO of this company, which means I may need to be very, very competitive, et cetera, et cetera. But within my work group, I am very team player, etc. So those are incompatible, if you will. Therefore, I repress my desire, right? Or it can be my fears. It can be any type of quality that, as I mentioned before, my social context has classified or categorized as not acceptable. So, for example, those are good examples for me. My mind could be aggression or even vulnerability, right? There's many areas of work that to show up open and vulnerable is something that is really incompatible to the function that we have, for example. So those areas, regardless of what they are, and they can be anything that is repressed, those areas that are part of the shadow are really difficult to acknowledge. There's something within them that is threatening your own ability to be successful, right? So if we think
Mhm.
about it, Peter, how would the shadow relate to the ego, right? Again, we talk about ego as the conscious part of his, of one psyche, and the
Mhm.
shadow exists in the unconscious,
Unconscious.
but
Mhm.
it is part of the overall psyche.
Mhm.
So if you think about it, the ego, which is our
Mhm.
our interesting, immature friend. I think this is how I see it. Our ego typically will repress or avoid or hide all those shadow aspects because they are in direct conflict with my idealized self-image, right? That image
Right.
that somewhere in our mind it says, oh, this is how I show up and this is the best. So let's pretend this is an Instagram, right? And you only post in Instagram with filters or at an angle that shows your best side. That's the ego, the egogram. Just kidding.
The
But
egogram. Yeah.
and the shadows are all in the delete box of your photos, right? No, not my best self. Let's delete, delete, delete. The fact is, we are all of it. We are this composite image, right? And so the interesting component here, and I think is the area that is really interesting, Peter, is the fact that persona and ego, right? Those create this tension, right? If you think about the ego is the conscious self and the shadow is the unconscious self. And so there's a polarity or a duality between the two of them,
Mhm.
right? But at the end of the day, we all are in our evolutionary
Mhm.
journey, right?
Mhm.
All of
Mhm.
us live in this duality, good and evil, bad and good, tall or short. I'm just thinking of external attributes here, but those are any type of a dual opposite or dual nature of that resides in us. But at some point, we're going to integrate, and integrating means accepting, loving, forgiving, and reaching that true, authentic nature of who we want to be, right?
Yeah.
So,
Integrating.
yeah,
Mhm.
go
In
ahead.
this case, when we think of spiritual progress and we think of integration,
Yes,
we're not talking about eradicating the shadow, if even if that were possible, but this idea that somehow I can have no negativity ever at
yeah,
all, that
yeah,
somehow it must be completely stricken from my very being.
yeah.
Um, my understanding is that's not the case. It's more, as you've been, I think, suggesting, having it more in balance in some way.
Yeah,
And
and the funny thing here is the concept, Peter, that the ego becomes this mediator between the persona, which we can call it the social self, and
mhm,
the shadow, the rejected self, right? The hidden self. So it is within the ego itself that is that mediator, uh, hiding or highlighting the other. And it's just very interesting, this whole idea. because if we think about it, right, the conflict that is inherent in this situation requires perhaps this mediator we're calling the ego to uphold certain ideals, right? And at
Hmm.
some point, the ego must recognize what it's been repressing. So that's where it comes out eventually, right? These, I love
Hmm.
when we call it this. I can't believe I said that. It was the proverbial Freudian slip, or some things that just they keep popping up, or when we talk about the very prudish person, right? And they
Hmm.
get drunk, and boom, everything that
Suddenly
was
they're very loose. Yeah.
yeah. Or this is a conversation that I just had it not so long ago. So interesting. Um, with the on the topic somehow was the idea, and this is an older woman talking about um, the social filters that we've put in our societies, and those are not bad, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We're discussing about unconscious bias and how we our mind creates biases. And those are egoic construct to help ourselves classify good, bad, right? And then she says, interesting enough, in the subject of senile dementia or even Alzheimer, where and she's from Britain, but she was talking about how everyone has a racist grandma. And I thought it was so funny, like a racist grandma. And immediately, Peter, my mind went to the beginning of my career. I mean, this is over 30 years ago, right? Where I was working with a much, much older head of the company, where he made comments. They're like, what?
Yeah.
I, I,
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I
Sure.
can't believe you're saying that. But if you think about when this person was born and what were those social norms or
Hmm.
accepted behaviors, that comment was completely okay, but not
Absolutely.
30 years
Yeah.
ago, right?
Well, I mean, speaking of theater,
Yeah.
um, vaudeville was a popular form of entertainment in the United States that began around the 1860s, 1870s after the Civil War ended.
Yeah.
And it was one of those forms of theater that kind of created the chain, like the theater chain, like the movie chain. So Lowe's
Mhm.
Theater, for instance, used to be a vaudeville circuit. And, famous individuals like Bob Hope, the Marx Brothers, the Three Stooges, all of them came out of vaudeville. And vaudeville was meant to be quick entertainment, short skits, and so forth. It also was sometimes deeply racist.
Yes.
Vaudeville, there was the blackface, for instance, and all the things that would make people uncomfortable today. But the
Hmm.
point that about that era, and I remember reading about this in a book that I enjoyed on vaudeville. It made the point that vaudeville was racist because the United States was racist. People were openly racist. 100 plus years ago, nobody thought anything about that would be wrong to, make fun of people because of their ethnicity and so
Hmm.
forth in ways that today people would say is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the social norms have changed. So not only did we all have, probably I shouldn't say the racist grandparents, but maybe even earlier than that, or more recent generations. It was
Yeah.
just common for people. I mean, there were people who just didn't even occur to them that there was something wrong with this attitude.
I love it. So what can we talk now that can enlighten this idea of integrating the persona in
Hmm.
the shadow? to become a more authentic person? Is there a story? I know there are many stories that
Mm,
I like to follow. For
mhm,
example, Nelson Mandela, right? The idea of a person that had a very strong persona, right? Before
mhm,
he went to jail for 27 years and tortured, but he surfaces as pretty much a different person. So there is in this journey that he lost that part of himself, right?
mhm,
He
mhm,
resurfaces as this amazing, reconstructed and heroic new person. What are maybe some stories that we can talk about that can exemplify this idea of losing oneself, who
mhm,
we were, right? To then, through whatever break of before and after the transition point, you come back, you return to now look at yourself, but now with no longer with a persona or a mask, but now with a more, much more authentic view of who we are.
Um, well, do you know the movie Platoon?
Yes.
Oliver Stone did. Okay, there's elements of that in that movie. Not necessarily the positive transition, but he starts off as a soldier in the Vietnam War who is kind of a idealist, signed up, thought he ought to serve. And as he encounters more and more the cynicism, at some point his much more aggressive side emerges in the film. And there's these two guys in the movie, I forget the names. One of them was William Defoe's character, and they're both strong, rugged individuals, but one is more of a benevolent type, and the other's more of a the shadow type, if you will.
Yeah.
And in that movie, the benevolent is killed by the shadow character, as it were, and that eventually the protagonist kills the shadow character in that film. And in doing so, there is a kind of merging of himself. It's not absolutely clear by the end where he might go next. But as he's at the very end of the movie, after a major battle in which he finally kills the antagonist of the movie, um, he's flying up in a helicopter away from the battle scene and leaving uh, the Vietnam War, and presumably is going to go home soon. And he's kind of in shock, as it were,
Yeah.
and yet something is definitely not the same. As he was writing and throughout the movie, he's writing letters to his grandmother. So he's talks about what life is like as a soldier in this jungle, in this war, and so forth. And at the end of it, there is this feeling that he's going to have to find a way to begin again, that the way he was at the beginning is simply gone in many ways,
Yeah.
or it's been reconfigured somehow. He's managed to. There has been an integration in it. Is it a positive integration? Yes and no. Um, he brought out his more aggressive side. You know,
Can I say what I remember about the movie?
sure.
It's because it's very interesting that you're struggling with the word, right? How to describe the
Mm,
the one that comes back, and to me, it's disillusionment, right? He
yeah.
starts the movie with a very almost naive look
Hmm.
into what the experience of war was and came
Hmm.
back now disillusioned, as in all the horrific um, uh, experiences woke him up to the brutality,
Hmm.
and the brutality that perhaps he did not know existed within himself, right? So it's a more mature, scarred,
Yeah.
yet a more authentic, integral person.
Right, because the naive self that was his persona in the beginning, and it
Hmm.
wasn't a persona he could live with throughout his
Yeah.
entire life. He
Yeah,
had to.
and this is a good point, right? We and I love Joseph Campbell in his
Mhm,
studies on the hero, right? The
right,
journey of the
hero
hero.
with a thousand faces.
Yes, and it's to me it's that idea that the hero starts very weak and not well prepared perhaps, but the courage to confront all that there is out there exists. And I think it's incredible if we think about it. We are all heroes, right? If we think in terms of
Mhm.
the journey of the immortal soul, the immortal spirit. We
Mhm.
are going incarnation after incarnation, or life after life, if you want to talk about it, or existence after existence, coming to see new experiences and facing with courage, facing with the idea that what you've had in the past, and I'm putting my hands in the back to the back here because it's all that precedes me today, all my
Mhm.
experience, good, bad, or whatever, but they make who I am and they give me the mechanism to keep moving, to forging on. But as I go through another challenge or even another source of pain, Peter, it is preparing me for the next, right?
Right. Going back to the
Yeah,
ego is a force of our existence, a force of nature, if you will.
yeah,
It can be positive or negative. If we have a distorted ego, then we may indulge in egoistic type behavior and so forth. But when we talk about the way the persona is used to adapt to certain situations,
yeah,
environments, people, etc., that's a function of the ego. It might be for good reasons, it might be for positive reasons. The way in which we bring out our shadow. So, like in the end of Platoon, he finally kills the soldier who sort of is the personification of cynicism and nastiness and everything else.
yeah,
And he not only shoots the guy, but he shoots the guy when the guy's wounded and
mm,
can't really defend himself. And in fact,
yeah,
he eggs him on to do it, says, kill me. And then he does. Um, so that's not, something we think of as terribly positive. It's not positive, but at the same time, he needed, I say this with some trepidation, but he did need to go through that because he had to find that shadow side of himself and bring it out in such a way that it doesn't push him around later on in life.
yeah.
But
Can
also, yeah,
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why do you think, and this is again back to Jung's concepts, why do you think that this inner process of confronting and accepting our shadow so important for our psychological maturity, our spiritual maturity?
well, first of all, it's there, it's part of who we are.
Hmm.
And when we are not conscious of parts of our shadow or even what it might be,
Hmm.
then that's where the persona can take over to our own detriment. In other words, I'm so afraid of my own negativity, I'm so afraid of my shadow that I'll do anything to project this image, no matter how dishonest it is, but I'll project this image of being something that I'm not. So, as an example, let's say the shadow is I have a lot of anger, a lot of rage, but I'm always kind and benevolent on the surface, and I try to make everyone think that I'm, the epitome of Buddhist tolerance or what have you. And yet there's this rage underneath. Well, am I tapping into that negativity, acknowledging it, not being afraid of it, but don't let it control me either? So I'm not suggesting that even if we have anger within us, it means we should just, express it however we wish. That's not the point. The point is that we don't hide from it or be afraid of it.
Yeah.
it's important that we acknowledge our, the part of our shadow that we're conscious of. Can we be 100% conscious of our shadow? Maybe, I don't know. Probably not. But at least we can make ourselves more conscious of our shadow so that we can then learn to live with it and not have it control us. And when we talk about integration, balance, and so forth, it's putting, well, I'll put this out there. It's in some ways putting our shadow, our negativity to more positive use.
Yes.
Meaning that, do we need anger? Sometimes we do. Sometimes, let's say we're having a problem with somebody and we don't like how they're treating us. Well, it's positive if we acknowledge what it is about their behavior we don't like. And once we're conscious of it, then the next question is, how do I handle this? Do I blow up at the person? Do I get very aggressive? Or do I find a calm and more compassionate way to confront that person? So I'm channeling anger in a positive sense to try to make a change or at least encourage a discussion rather than just, blow up because they make me angry.
Yeah,
So,
I always think, Peter, on the three most primal emotions or emotional response, right?
mhm, mhm,
And they're all risen from um, the instinctive need to survive. So
right,
the three F's, right? So fight or flight or freeze,
right,
and
mhm,
how those instinctive response to a threat can be looked at from a emotional response, as in a fight would be anger, a flight, which is based on fear, right?
mhm,
And the
right,
freeze is when you completely stop, and that can be a metaphor for um, depression or sadness that leads to
mhm,
in all of those things in a
mhm,
pathological heightened expression would be depression, anxiety, right, and
mhm,
aggression without measure. But those, regardless if it's pathological, those are basic. Those are basic elements that, oh, by the way, is not exclusive to human beings,
it's
but the
part of our
entire,
spiritual heritage. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm,
So it's important for us to understand, and I love
mhm,
to see if, for example, sadness or
mhm,
depression, melancholy is
mhm,
something that we cannot be, because the idea of success is the super amazing smiling face that marketing poses as the especially youth of today. They're all laughing and dancing and having that a great sense of belonging and so the social element, right? And unfortunately, life is the opposite of that. Today, we are dealing with a younger generation that is fraught with anxiety and fraught with difficulties with mental well-being, right? And being able to feel just relaxed. We are so constrained with so much re- expectation today that and it's not just one mask. It's so many. I'm thinking a juggling of masks, because there's so many different expectations at any given moment, right? This response for this is something versus that, and how do we
it
manage that? And we can only manage through really looking and being authentic, right, Peter?
it sounds
And
like the persona that's out of alignment, that the
yes.
persona is unbalanced, as it were. Because I
Yes,
don't
yes.
think Jung was saying that persona is completely bad. I mean,
No,
it's
no.
a part of who we are, right? So we need it.
Yeah,
And when we think about integration between the persona and the shadow, it is what you were talking about before. It's about survival.
yeah,
But so in the case of the pressures that young people are feeling, if they feel like they have to juggle all these different masks and all these different personas, that's a lot of self-induced pressure,
yes.
unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunate. We understand it, and it's very
Hmm.
difficult for all of us who are parents or siblings or in not may not even be in an immediate family, right? But in those
Yeah,
groups of that we're part of, if we see
right.
that level of anxiety, it just is very difficult. And if I
Hmm.
were to just provide that warm embrace that the readings by Joanna D'Angelis brings to
Right.
us, is the
Hmm.
fact that we all need to be aware of it, right? And
Hmm.
aware of almost the unfairness, right?
Yeah.
Unfairness, because it's just too much for us to juggle, but to, at a minimum, to understand that there may be opposites within those polarities within ourselves, and that the
Hmm.
best way to emerge successfully, if you will, is to recognize that they are and really understand that those constructs, those social constructs are there because it's for us to be better prepared to be in this context, but that the context shifts, right? And
Hmm.
those ancestral, if you will, burdens, they should be lessened as we mature. I think if I were to quote Jonah DeAngelis, Peter, I would say there are really amazing lessons when we decide to be indeed the hero, which is have the courage to go through the self discovery journey
Hmm.
and really do a deep dive into looking at my true identity, right? And the true purpose of this earthly journey, if you will. What is the true meaning of our quote unquote pilgrimage? And
Hmm.
the hint here is it would be a waste if we are here just to meet the demands of the latest fad, right? The
Right.
truth is we're here
Hmm.
because we want to recognize those conflicts and the awareness of the need for meaning and significance of this existence, because it's
Hmm.
one of many in this journey through immortality.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I grew up with some people that I knew who struggled with alcoholism.
Mhm.
And I remember one person, not a relative, who was talking about the anxiety this person used to have when she would have like guest parties and people coming over and everything, that everything had to be perfect, the setting and everything had to be just right. And she finally reached a point where she said, no, it doesn't have to be perfect. And
Yeah.
it was liberating for her because speaking of the persona, she wasn't so afraid of, having flaws that God forbid somebody might notice, or God forbid the table isn't set just right and everything's perfectly color coded or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when going back to the idea that we always have to please everybody else, no, we do not. That doesn't mean we want to just be chronically indifferent to everybody else. But when Joanna de Angelis talks about Jesus, she makes the point that even when he was abandoned, maligned, and ostracized, it didn't change his authentic self. He emerged from it, and in many ways, he was more free than he was before. Um,
Yes.
so it's that idea that Part of what it means to be an authentic self is that we are truly comfortable in our own skin with who we are. And that includes both our flaws as well as our attributes. And
I
that we
love
don't
it.
need 100% validation from everybody around us in order to feel like we matter, because it's
Oh,
not true.
thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for your beautiful words. We are at the end of our time today, Peter. And I just want to say to all of you who are here with us today, our discussion on how complex and transformative the journey of self integration can be, right, is an invitation for all of us to embrace both our persona and our shadow. And when we do that, we begin to move towards a better, fuller, more holistic understanding of who we are because we allow us to live with a greater sense of authenticity and actually emotional balance.
Hmm.
I think, Peter, ultimately, the key to our growth,
Hmm.
as Jung would say, right, is in recognizing and integrating those parts of us that we might not want or allow to face.
Hmm.
And so it is really freeing ourselves from our own prisons. So I just say, as we come to the end of our episode, let us all remember that the journey toward individuation and the sense of wholeness or fulfillment of plenitude is not a destination, right? We don't get there. We continuously getting closer. It's that process.
It's
And
an
when
ongoing
we
process. Yeah.
Yes. So when we
Hmm.
cultivate the sense of self-discovery, self-awareness, we automatically start embracing our shadow. And
Hmm.
most important, everyone, including me and you, Peter, we must practice forgiveness starting with ourselves and others. And
Yeah.
at that point, that's when we can continue on our path toward true self discovery and spiritual growth. But I want to say, everyone, thank you so much for being here with us today. We hope this conversation inspired you to reflect on those concepts of persona, of shadow, of integration of those two opposing forces within ourselves, and how we can um, allow, and I say this to you and but to myself mostly, but how we all can allow ourselves more understanding, acceptance, love, and forgiveness. But until next time, I just want to say stay curious, stay compassionate, keep striving for those deeper truths within. If this is the first time you are here with us today, please note that the Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna De Angelis, and we hope we're able to perhaps expand your own concepts. And what I mean by that is to your own concept of spirituality, right? And psychology as well. I want to thank Peter and I want to thank our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. We'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you so much for being here, and goodbye, everyone.